Long gone are the days of sexy women cladded in skimpy bikinis, perched on top of beautiful cars while eating succulent burgers, or women experiencing the big O for all to hear simply because they washed their hair in the airport bathroom. How about those gorgeous angels working the runway, giving many of us fever dreams of wanting to one day don a pair of wings of our own? Yes, boys and girls, I am talking about sex. And while the appeal of sex has been a story retold and resold since the dawn of man, there is something on the horizon. Something has been within pop culture for the past decade that is proving to be a top contender. I'm talking about trauma. In today's episode of Sex Sells, but Trauma Sells More. Be sure to stick around. You don't want to miss what I have to say. Alrighty, heartbeats, that is your final and official warning that we have entered the chaos and that class is now in session. If today's episode is going to be triggering or infuriating to you, I highly suggest that you leave the conversation now. We do not do rage baiting, we do not do rage clicking, we are here for insightful conversation only. So once again, if today is going to be a rough patch for you, please go ahead and exit the conversation. For those of you who will be sticking around and staying, please go get your snacks, get your drinks, get settled in while I go ahead and take care of some housekeeping notes with today's sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Mama Ethel's Herbal Infusions. Mama Ethel's Herbal Infusions offers natural wellness solutions that rejuvenate and nourish from the inside out. Their artisanal body butters and goat milk soaps are crafted with care, blending nature's finest ingredients for radiant skin and holistic well-being. They stand apart by sourcing organic, sustainable ingredients, ensuring every product reflects their commitment to purity and quality. And guys, as a regular user of Mama Ethel's myself, I can stand on that. One of my favorite things from them is the shampoo and conditioner. My hair is very, very coarse and kinky. It is a 4C nightmare. Very, very thirsty bitch, no matter what type of product I put into it. But when it comes to wash day, Mama Ethel's is there saving the day, giving my hair some nourishing treatment that it desperately needs, leaving it soft and bouncy and flowy, and it's just, it's a great time. With Mama Ethel's, customers experience the essence of self-care, indulging in luxurious skincare rituals that elevate their everyday. Join them in embracing a journey of natural beauty and wellness. Elevate your skincare routine today with Mama Ethel's Herbal Infusions. Trust me, you're not going to regret it. With all that being said, my notes are complete. I hope you are back with your snacks, and let's go ahead and get on into it. Woo! Let me tell you something. I was kind of afraid to talk about this, but everybody's talking about it, so let's go ahead and talk about it. This episode has actually been on my list to do since May 8th of last year, and that was during the peak of like the murder documentation, or not documentation, but the murder docuseries that was coming out, the Dahmer story, and how everybody was just eating up the trauma story and the trauma porn while completely neglecting the fact that there are still families that are reliving and going through this horrible nightmare, and to see people making money off of their stories, and to see people pretty much glamorizing and obsessing over their nightmare is devastating. And I believe that it just kind of morphed and continued to get worse with the most recent incidents that have passed. You know, we had a rating that just went down, as well as another documentary that released about some behind the scene antics that was happening on studio sets. Again, we're seeing that trauma bond, that trauma porn obsession of people just diving right in and swallowing the stories of victims, but not pushing or continuing the conversation forward. And that is what I want to really touch on. Trauma is in the room with everybody. Trauma is here. We can't ignore the elephant anymore. But the thing is what do we do with it after we have put it out on the table? I think the generation has done a wonderful job initiating the fact that trauma does exist in everybody's lives, that it is something that people go through. However, there has been a huge disconnect from my point of view that all of a sudden trauma and having trauma makes you cool. It makes you relatable, which is both good and bad depending on how you spin it off. Is that making any sense? So I just want to kind of touch on that and just kind of not prove, but talk about how speaking on trauma and using your trauma to essentially get a bag. Sex is no longer selling. Yes, don't get me wrong, there are OnlyFans girls and, still sexual antics and things like that. Like I said in the beginning of the opening, sex has been here, it's going to stay here, it's not going to go away. That's for a completely different episode. But as I stated, that we have a new contender in town, and it's definitely going to be trauma bonding, trauma porn, and anything of those sorts, with people dumping and sharing their stories and vomiting that trauma out to where people can feel related, feel seen, and bond to it. And like I said, just kind of make it their personality and their identity, but not continuing to work forward to either start healing those traumas or dismantle them so that they can start understanding them and digesting them so that they're able to move forward. A lot of people have found a lucrative lifestyle in remaining the victim and bonding and holding their trauma stories, so much to the point where they'll listen to other people's trauma stories and apply it to themselves and share their story when those things never actually happened. And this is a very damaging narrative within communities who actually are true victims, who actually do have those stories and have those stories stolen from them and told from a perspective of popularity and trending. And it just mitigates and it just minimizes them while they're watching other people glorify it and talk on it and make money off of it. Trauma is selling right now. It's been selling for the last couple of years. And as someone who has been on this earth a good couple of decades, I can definitely see the change in that. I had, a pretty cool childhood, and then I was just absolutely bombarded with the work hustle culture at the same time as the sexualizing culture. And then now in this later decade, I'm definitely seeing that people stepping forward and speaking about their traumas is the newest and latest trend. And it's very, very difficult for therapists and counselors, trauma and psychology coaches as myself, things of that nature, to be able to speak to people and get them to realize that their trauma is not a death sentence, mainly because the rest of the town square, the internet, has made it seem so that is just the way life is. So I want to sit and chat a little bit and break down some things, talk on some things. And then of course I want you guys to fire off in the comment section, leave notes so I can go ahead and read them, so I can hear your experiences from it on how this has either belittled or harmed you in a way, if you are someone who suffers from trauma, not legitimately, but has very deep rooted trauma issues, and this whole trend has overshadowed you, or things of the sort. But like I said, I want to get started on this. So trauma, I definitely do feel like the word trauma has become a buzzword. It's giving me synergy vibes. You remember back in the day when you first got started in the corporate and everybody was like, it's synergy. You had no idea what the hell it means. I definitely feel that this generation has taken the word trauma and just slapped it onto anything and everything that they could apply it to. And that's damaging, and it's a very dangerous and slippery slope for us to be on, and a dangerous slippery slope and a direction for us to be headed in. Trauma is a person's experience to emotional distress resulting from an event that overwhelms their capacity to emotionally digest. And this is very important to put here, because I've noticed that with the uptick of trauma, and with that being trauma stories and that being the thing that's being shared around, it's literally the most inconveniencing thing, and then they throw their hands up and say, I've been traumatized. And is it an inconvenience? Absolutely. Is it annoying? Yes, 100%. Is it something that may have rubbed you the wrong way? Yes, I validate all of that. But to sit here and attach the word trauma to it, I think that goes a little bit far. I think that's a little bit of a stretch, and it's I'm not one to tell anybody who, like, what their trauma is, okay? But I do question those who often reach for that word and say that they've had, a traumatic experience for something that's really inconveniencing. And I think that's what they're really trying to say, is that it's inconveniencing them. However, the public square has everybody so stuck on the idea that they're owed something for it, that if they don't announce it as trauma, it's not going to be taken seriously. We're seeing almost like a recycling of the, if we don't listen to the victims, nobody's going to believe them. But the thing is that our actual victims have fallen so silent because nobody listens to them, and they're now being overshadowed by a lot of victim-minded individuals who realize that if I say this and I do it to this extremity and I get this loud and I build up my platform and I get a couple of thousand people to scream with me, then my traumas are valid and I get the attention that I have been seeking. Completely negating and ignoring the fact that there are some people who have, like I said, these legitimate symptoms and life-altering changes to them because of actual trauma that has happened. The DSM-5 defines trauma as exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence in one or more of the following ways: directly experiencing the traumatic events, witnessing in person or the events as it occurred to others, or learning that the traumatic events occurred to a close family member and a close friend. And there are 3 different types of trauma that is categorized here. We have acute trauma, which is resulted from singular incidents; chronic trauma, which is repeated and prolonged, such as the domestic violence or abuse; and complex trauma, where it's exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events, often an invasion of impersonal nature. A lot of people tend to attach traumatic events to external things that have gone on in their life. And if you notice that they will share the stories and then they'll say that this happened to me outside in the world, but they don't really internalize it, or they don't hold it close to their heart or wear it on their sleeves. And it really only comes back up when somebody mentions it to them. Like, hey, didn't you go through this? And then it's kind of like this whole act of, oh my gosh, yes, that did happen. And it was very traumatic for me. And I had to block it out. Whereas you speak with victims and those who have symptoms of their traumatic events, it's not something that they just brush off. It's not something that they just suddenly remembered or black out. They do have blackout moments, but at the same time, they're still reliving those very intense and very damaging moments quietly to themselves. It's very internalized. It's something that they can't really escape throughout their day and throughout their life. And that's what I personally am seeing missing in a lot of the trauma trending. It's stories. This happened to me and I'm just traumatized and I just can't do nothing about it. But then we don't hear anything, or we don't see any continuing symptoms other than the continued story of another event and another event and another event. But we don't see many shutdowns. We don't see many stutters or just kind of like long distance staring. We don't see anything that actually is showing that post-traumatic distress or anything of the order of the type of disorder. Now, I would like to put a very major disclaimer here. I am not a psychologist. I'm not a licensed therapist or anything of the sorts, but I do study psychology. I have studied neurolinguistics. I am certified in several things that involve this aspect on top of my own personal experiences and how it impacts me. So I'm speaking from experience and a lot of studying and continued study. Eventually I will be worked up to that point, which is why I'm comfortable speaking on it now. And if any experts are out there listening in, I would like for you to reach out to me and give me your insight on it so that I can continue to develop and continue learning the skill sets needed to kind of narrow in and see how things are going with this. But continuing on, it's just something that has been kind of irking me lately because, like I said, with me being a victim of my own traumatic experiences and having friends that have traumatic experiences and working on cases and reading cases and being assisting coach to therapists and psychologists for traumatic experiences and being trauma informed, it's just, I don't know. It's given me a weird rub. It's given me a weird vibe, a very uncomfortable one. And seeing it pretty much shoved in everybody's faces, like this is the way to get noticed. This is the way to get money, is to share and sell your traumatic experiences. It has me sitting on a very weird moral line. With the release of the most recent documentary, Quiet on Set, I'm both proud and a bit concerned with the way that it was presented. Now, I personally did not watch the documentary. I can't. There is nothing in that documentary that I don't already know about, that I probably haven't experienced personally. It's not something that I'm going to put myself through. So I don't need to watch the documentary. I've heard enough through the grapevine to kind of get a good solid gist on what the documentary is about, correct? So that being said, I sit on the line of I'm happy that these victims are able to share their story and get it out and expose the suspects, because allegedly on a lot of these things, except for the one that was convicted, right? But to be able to expose their abusers and the suspects for what it is that they have done to them and how it has altered and completely changed and defined their life moving forward. However, at the same time, is this the proper way to go about it? Because at the end of the day, it's still a production, and at the end of the day, paychecks were still being cut. And it just, it strikes a question to me on how do we open up these conversations and how do we return it back to those who are actually fighting to have recovery and have some type of normalization in their life. We're seeing victim help programs get cut. We're seeing an increase of victims coming in, needing these types of services and social aid and whatnot, yet there's no funding going into it. There's nothing actually provided to victims of abuse for them to attempt to recover and start moving forward. So we start seeing them reach out to do self-help measures and find themselves almost being convinced and gaslit further, deeper and further into their trauma bond, simply because someone online told them so and told them to do that. And it's just kind of alarming to me because I, as someone who has gone through that, I experienced the lapse in resources given to me. I was lied to by police when they said that resources were available, and there weren't any in my area. In fact, one of the women's shelters that did reach out to me finally after my domestic abuse, it took a whole year later, and it was just a postcard. So you can imagine that if I didn't end up having the luck that I had or the support that I had, where would I have ended up? That could have, driven me back to my abuser, because where was I going to go? And things were going to be worse. That could have driven me into the arms or into the home of a different abuser, because I'm trying to escape. And where am I supposed to go? Onto the streets, homelessness, introduction into drugs or prostitution, things that a lot of victims do see themselves going through if they don't have those resources and support. But everybody wants to hear the story, and everybody, gasp and clutches their pearls once the story is released, but they don't do anything beyond that. It just becomes a conversation piece, a conversation topic for, 48 hours to a week, depending on how severe everything is. And then we forget about it. We move on to the next, social media frenzy. And it's just really damning, and it's also really telling. If it's not going to make money, or if it already made money and it's no longer generating money, then there's no need to continue that conversation. But it is something that's going to continue to, produce and reproduce, because everybody is hungry for trauma porn. Everybody is going to listen in on it, regardless of if it's something that they want to listen to. It doesn't matter if it's coming from a TikToker or the next person on YouTube, but if it becomes a grand production and it's, plastered on one of these huge studios, everybody's eating it up. And my question is, why? I understand, curiosity. I understand wanting to hear these stories and know the truth, and I guess kind of have some type of validation to your own inklings or to the conspiracy theories that we've all crossed and have read in our lives. But where do we go after that conversation? That is my question. Like I said, everybody has experienced trauma sometime in their life, some type of form of acute trauma anyways, which is the result of a singular incident. And I'm not talking about inconvenience. I'm sorry. This is going to be very hard to hear, but a lot of stories that I hear kind of parroted back to me just sounds like inconveniences that you can literally be upset about and be valid about it, but shrug off and move on with your day. But those who have, actual singular incidents, like maybe a dog bit you when you were younger, so you kind of have like a traumatic experience with the dog and you're not a fan of dogs, or, you got into a car accident, so driving isn't your strongest skill set, but it is something that you kind of like got used to doing. You're just a little on edge. Everybody has some sort of an acute traumatic experience. I'm pretty confident to say to speak on that and say that is valid. But what happens when we come into the zones of chronic trauma or the complex trauma, and seeing people play up their acute trauma incidents almost as if they are chronic or complex? We are starting to strip the voices of those who truly suffer. And I think it's time that we start calling out those who are overshadowing and stripping those voices, simply because it gets them a couple of million views, a couple of thousand likes, and a few hundred comments on their platform. I'm not saying that it's not valid. I just want more conversation. I want more open dialogue. I want people to start moving forward with their traumas instead of just leaning in and saying, "Oh, I understand, it happened to me too," and then everybody hugging each other, and then just staying in that energy. You guys, you're not victims. Like, you are a victim, but that's not the definition of your life. You were a victim of a traumatic experience, but that's not who you have to be. That is not a personality trait. That's not something that you truly want to carry on. And I want to see people start doing better as we move forward. I want to see people who engage in the trauma porn resell and retelling of these stories. I want to see active conversation about what we can start doing for those victims, what we need to start doing to hold people accountable, what type of legislation do we have to come up with, what type of laws or programs do we need to bring back. I want to see, people who speak out about their traumatic experiences kind of have a little bit of challenge put on them. I'm not saying to victim blame or not to believe them, but just kind of ask them, like, so what are you what are you planning to do with this? Are you going to therapy? Are you going to get help? Or do you have a self-help book? Like, what is it that you plan to do to remove yourself from this type of mentality, so that we can continue thriving and having a healthy society, instead of one that is unable to take constructive criticism, instead of a society that is unable to just kind of shrug things off and let it roll off their shoulders, instead of a society that literally just shuts down and cries at the most inconveniencing thing. That's not a way to live, and that's not how you were destined to live. I believe that the trend of trauma and the lucrative aspect of it has so many people in a weird mental chokehold. And I'm truly asking, if you are someone who has suffered from a traumatic event, what is it that you are doing to help yourself move forward? Or are you just staying in that pattern? And again, I was really worried to kind of launch this episode because it's going to make a lot of people upset, but it's a very, very real conversation that needs to be had. Trauma is the word of the decade. It is a very, very real psychiatric term, but pop culture has made it so popular that it is beginning to lose its meaning, and that is a very dangerous slope to be on. We already struggle with getting victim voices out there. We already struggle with finding the victims and being able to prosecute the abusers and prevent them from continuing on and prevent them from hurting more people. But when you constantly hear, oh, they're traumatized, oh, trauma this, trauma that, trauma, people tend to shy away now. People are starting to become tired and bogged down by your quote unquote trauma, and it's making it harder for those who truly have trauma, chronic and complex, trauma symptoms. It's making it very difficult for us to find them. It's making it very difficult for them to come out come out of the shadows and get the help that they desperately seek, because nobody is going to believe them. They already don't believe them, and now that we have popularized the word trauma, people are really going to not believe them. I just posted a video on my YouTube speaking out on how Nikki Marina talked about writing down the things that are happening to you and creating a detailed log. And I spoke on my experience about it because I had subconsciously did that when I was going through my trauma. And it helped me a lot in therapy, not just with reclaiming my life and healing myself, but it stopped a lot of investigation from my therapist, and it was able to give them the insight that they needed to make a solid call on what it was I was suffering from and what I was going through and how to proceed forward and help me. I hear a lot of therapy stories come in, and they talk about how their therapist just kind of like beats them around the bush and just kind of asks the same questions over and over again. Now, that's going to be a completely episode for a completely different day. But I listen to those stories and I feel bad because they're constantly repeating themselves, almost as if they have to prove that their trauma is legitimate. And it's a very sad and shitty place to be in, because my therapist was a challenger like that. I would retell a story that happened to me, and she would challenge me to see if I would recant my statement, is where I was going with that, or to see if I would change it or change up the story. And one day I finally just said, no, this is what happened. I have a log and I can prove it. And I had diary and detailed notes of the things I was experiencing with dates and timestamps. And when I handed that over to my therapist, they immediately stopped with the investigation, interrogation aspect of everything, and was able to proceed forward because they were able to actually see that I was traumatized, that I was suffering from PTSD, as well as some narcissistic abuse. So, with the buzzword of trauma becoming what it is in today's society within this decade, unfortunately, I would heavily suggest and sadly have to say that if you are currently suffering from trauma, to start making those notes and those details, because it is going to help you find your voice, as well as you'll be able to come back to it a little bit later on and heal yourself from it with qualified therapists and a team with you, so that you can go through exposure therapy if you choose to do so, and try to regain control over the things that you had gone through. But it will definitely give you that leg up on telling your story and trying to get that help without many obstacles being thrown at you. It's actually kind of sad that I even have to say that. That is how overused and watered down the word trauma, has become. Like I said, I truly do believe that it was all done with good intention. I do believe that people were just trying to bring awareness to things. I do believe that people are trying to break the stigma and be open and be honest about the things that they suffer with and what they go through. And I do believe that people are trying to sound the alarm on their abusers and give people heads ups and warnings. I think that's a beautiful thing, and I think that's something that we should continue doing. However, like I said, we are missing that second aspect to this whole ordeal. Like I said, where do we go with the conversation from here? What resources are we going to start providing to those who are truly suffering? What consequences are going to come to those who kind of use it to just push a narrative and cause harm and cause blame and point fingers to individuals and other people, when that wasn't even what happened. That wasn't even the case or the story. It was just something that made them popular. Look, trauma sells. If you have a good trauma story, you are going to be revered and idolized and supported and loved and given all the attention until proven otherwise. And it's just very damning to see. It's heartbreaking to see, because I want to know, where is that same energy and that same support to our victims who are forced underground, who are forced to remain silent, who are forced to just deal with it? I have questions, and I want to start seeing that dismantled. I want to stop seeing the money come in for it. I want to stop seeing these huge productions done for it. Until we put in place resources and systems, or that money that is generated, it's actually given to organizations and other nonprofit companies to actually start healing and providing those resources. I don't think people should be making a bag off of trauma porn. I don't think people should be forcing others to sell their stories, or giving them gratification or perks and incentives for sharing their stories without it having some type of put back into society, without it being returned back to those who are truly suffering. I think if we saw people actually be held accountable for the way that they tell their stories and regain control over the loss of psychiatric words such as trauma, I bet you a lot of the stories will start changing. I bet you we will start seeing a complete turnabout on how people explain or describe how their day went or what it is that they're going through. Because then there's a risk, there's a cost to the way that they tell what happened to them. And again, this isn't towards actual victims. These are towards the ones who like to use trauma as a reason for their poor behaviors, for their bad takes, for their reason to be a bad person. And you know, they pop up and are just like, oh, I'm like this because I had a traumatic experience. Well, hey, sorry, Cupcake, you had a traumatic experience and I feel for you, and I'm absolutely sorry that you had gone through that ... However, healing is your responsibility. I understand that you are not the one who created that wound, but it is your responsibility to ensure that your wound is properly cleaned, properly medicated if need be, stitched up, bandaged, and constantly checked to make sure that it is healing properly. And I don't think a lot of people are holding those accountable enough. And before anybody comes for me and they're like, how could you tell somebody how to heal? I'm not telling you how to heal. I'm not telling you that there is a time limit. I'm not telling you that you should do it XYZ, that you need to do it this way. Healing is not linear. I have my good days. I have my bad days. I have more bad days than good days. But I know what is my responsibility. And I know the damage I can cause if I am not accountable for the things that I do, for the way that I act, or for the things that I say. I have seen too many people suffer because of other people's traumas, because they failed to take responsibility of their own healing and fix themselves, and thinks that it's everybody else's problem to deal with them the way that they are. I don't subscribe to that mentality. I don't subscribe to that ideology. If I walked around and blamed every man or every woman for the way that they had treated me, and this is why I'm such a terrible person, and my partner has to make up for the damages of the past, I would be a very single and a very lonely, bitter woman. That is how society will look at me. While I just stay within my own little cocoon, my own little mental mindset, and the little flying monkeys around me who keep validating that that's how I'm supposed to feel and that everybody else is wrong. I'm sorry, but you need to come out of your cocoon. You need to get out of your little perfect mindset. You need to get out of the people who are constantly telling you that this behavior and this attitude is okay, and start doing some actual real work. You need to start doing your shadow work. You need to go into the dark. You need to get yourself a therapist, a psychiatrist, whatever it is you need, a coach even. I don't care, but you need to start doing the damn work, because you are eradicating and you are erasing the voices of those who truly seek freedom from the mental hellscape, from the internal damnation that they suffer with day to day, all because you want to be popular on some platform by retelling a story about how you did not properly get napkins. Does this sound stupid to you? Is it just me? I don't know. But again, I can go on and on and on about this. And we're just going to go in circles at this point. We have made a society that is rewarded for shitty shenanigans. And trauma is a delicious bag to claim. I don't think trauma porn should be as highlighted or sold as it is. Like I said, I struggle with the moral aspect. I think it's great that victims are able to have a platform to come out and speak on and share their story. But what do we do after that? This is a huge flag. We are raising the flag of awareness. What do we do as a community, as a whole society moving forward? The victims are doing their work. They're getting the help that they need if they choose to do so. They're getting the help that they need. They're in years of therapy. They're constantly checking themselves and reliving these terrible events that have happened to them, but us as a society, what are we doing moving forward? What are we doing to fix these types of things? Or are we just going to continue waiting for the next documentary or for the next docu-series or whatever to drop with our mouths gaping open because we don't have nothing to watch at 8 p.m. when we get off of work? And we just want a moment to escape from our own personal daily lives by indulging through a looking glass of somebody else's trauma so that we can feel better about ourselves when we wake up in the morning. I refuse to participate in it. You let me know what it is that you want to do. And with that being said, that ends this episode of Sex Sells, but Trauma Sells More. Put it down in the comments what you think. Put down in the comments how you're feeling. I want to hear from you. Run it up with likes so that this episode can get out and I can continue doing episodes for you guys. Once again, my name is Ray. My higher spirit is Lyra. This is the official Classes in Session Chaotic Sync episode of Sex Sells, but Trauma Sells More. I hope you enjoyed. Stay beautiful. Be sure to drink your water. You deserve to be here. And to anybody else listening in, if you are a victim listening in and you made it to this moment, I have a message for you. You are the only one in charge of your story. Do not allow anybody to change the narrative or convince you otherwise. Make notes and documentations if need be. Keep a log with detailed timestamps and dates. Make sure it is safe and make sure that nobody knows that you have it, okay? You are not obligated to tell your story to anybody. If anyone ever steps up to you and say, well, I don't believe you because why didn't you say something sooner? Because the shit is scary and you were in a serious situation and you needed to get balance yourself. You don't have to answer that. You do not have to answer to somebody who has not gone through what you have been through. Do you have an understanding? Good. You don't have to share your story if you don't want to. But you owe it to yourself to stand up for yourself and take on the challenge of healing yourself so that you have a chance, have an opportunity at living the life you deserve to live. You don't deserve to live in fear. You don't deserve to live in guilt. You don't deserve to live in shame. You don't deserve to live in self-hate. You don't deserve to carry the scars and the burdens that have been placed on you. And I'm begging you to reach out, to do the work, to start healing from all of that and freeing yourself from the internal damnation that you suffer from every day. I am one of you. I understand how hard it is, but there is a way out. And I heavily, heavily believe that you can find your way out. I know you can. I know you can because I did it. You are beautiful. You deserve to be here. And I will see you next episode.